Hey, today I've got a tactical tutorial for you about light mortars, which I've been on a kind of a journey with my light mortars these past months, basically. Yeah, I've already done tutorials about the list build that I sort of build around these light mortars, but now I'm going to talk to you about how I tactically use them, having gained a lot more experience on the field of battle. Actually, how do I use those mortars? So that's what I'm talking about. Light mortars, a tactical tutorial. Now, light mortars, it has to be said, are not easy. They're not easy to play, so I wouldn't recommend them for beginning players. But for a little bit better players, maybe, you can figure this out if you listen and try them out. Do some of the things that I'm suggesting here. The caveats for this is, of course, that it's early days of V3. We don't know how the meta is evolving. We don't know where it's going to go. We might see something crop up that will make the light mortars just not worth it anymore. The army books are coming out. That may change everything. We don't know. And I also have to caveat with the fact that my experience with the light mortars is still limited. I've been to one major tournament. I did okay. I lost one game and won the rest. So I feel like the light mortars did okay for me. I've had, what I guess, 25 games, something like that, with the light mortar lists, UFO lists. So in that sort of range band, at least. So I'm not massively experienced with them yet, but I have figured out some things that make them work. Because one of the things that always happens as soon as people see my UFO list, they go like, "Ooh, that's so soft, it's gonna die. It's going to be blown away in the first 2 turns." And go and watch my game against Jonathan Martin. It didn't happen. So I'm staking a claim here that I can make the light mortars not just die out. Yeah. So how do I do that? Well, what are they? The light mortars, the right way to build them, and I do say that there's a right way and there are other ways to build them, but the right way for me is you have the 36-inch range of a light mortar. It is not fixed, which gives you an extra 6 inches of range. So that's 42. That's a lot of range. That's the back line of the enemy table, the enemy's deployment zone. You got HE1, which is, not great, but not bad. They can zero in, which is absolutely great. They should be bought inexperienced because they're cheap. They're in the 20 points range. I wrote down 21 and I actually think, was it 21 or is it a little bit more? I can't remember. And the right way to field them is to have multiple of them, right? One, that dies pretty easily. You need more. Are there other builds? Yes, there are. There are other ways to build and use light mortars. You could potentially run them regular or veteran. Veteran, you do that if you want them to survive. I'll argue in a minute that they're not very survivable anyway. So I just save the points, right? And you could also try and claim that light mortars can use spotters. I personally think that they shouldn't be able to do that. So there are other ways to build light mortars, there are other ways to fill light mortars. I just don't think they're as competitive as the one that I found. What are the strengths of the light mortar? Well, the range, of course, is one thing. That extra range is what makes the light mortar really work, this version for me. I also think that because indirect fire ignores cover, when you're shooting HE indirectly, it ignores the cover save. That is absolutely brilliant. And I would love my opponent to go down to half the hits. Perfect. That's just fine, because then the unit that I'm shooting at is not doing anything, right? So that ignoring cover save is absolutely godsend. I also like that they give the 2 pins. I'm not especially lucky with rolling that dice and getting 2 pins, but it's a little bonus. The zeroing in, I've already talked about that they can zero in is an absolute godsend, because that is what makes them so good. If you could just hit on 6s, then that wouldn't be great. But the fact that you can zero in, you can keep shooting at that one unit that you already made go down, so you have multiple turns where you zero in on that one unit, or you've got multiple light mortars zeroing in on that one unit. Right? I can get, for less than 50 points, I can get 2 light mortars. So 2 light mortars, are they better than 1 unit of 5 regulars? Yes, they are. They absolutely are. There are 2 order dice in the bag, and they can inflict damage on 2 other units. They can give out potentially 4 pins a turn. And yes, they're less survivable than the 1 unit, but it's still 2 units, right? So you might be able to kill one of them, but the other one's still alive. So cheap order dice, the ability to move and fire, the ability to fire smoke is also a nice little bonus. It's situational when it will come up, but against gunline armies, it can actually win you games. I have had it happen to me. World Open War, my game against Paul Wickens, fired smoke, and that enabled my movement of my whole army having smoke, and it hindered his movement as well. So those are the strengths. The weaknesses is that the team is rather vulnerable. They're just 2 men. Typically, they're inexperienced. And in V3, long-range shooting is a lot more deadly. It hits more, which means that your unit is going to take those cover saves, and you're going to lose guys pretty early on. So how do I make them not lose guys? Because one hit and you lose 1 guy, and then you're 1 loss from breaking all the time, because you're halving the unit, right? So they're also vulnerable to morale tests, having just lost 1 guy. So one of the keys here I'm going to talk about in a minute to overcome this vulnerability is to use them late in the turn. I'll get back to that. They are also not actually that deadly. I have lost a Wolverine. I have my Wolverine here. Like last game, Jonathan Martin hit with one of his light mortars straight inside the Wolverine, killed it outright. Doof, went away. So that happens with open top vehicles, especially. But most of the time, you're rolling and you're hitting on a 6, right? You're hunting for 6s, like with multi-rocket launchers and everything else. But those 6s are not the point. I go back to that. So this is also overcome by not actually needing to hit. Which, even if you hit, that HE1, it means that maximum you get like 2 guys most of the time. You can sometimes end up just getting 4 guys if the enemy really clumps up their models, but most of the time you get 2 guys. And if they go down, that's 1 guy. So the amount of hits is not great. They're not massively deadly. I have yet to see them just obliterate an infantry unit over 2-3 turns. That doesn't happen, at least not to me. And +1 is not great, although it does help a bit with killing stuff. But it's not great. So they're not massively deadly in any respect. And they're pretty vulnerable. So why do I take them anyway? Well, having multiple light mortars, because they're so cheap, you can put pressure on a lot of the enemy's army. A lot of his units suddenly have a dice zeroing in. Suddenly it's a 5, maybe it's a 4 all of a sudden, right? You're overloading your opponent because he has a list inside his head of things he needs to do first. And putting that pressure on his units it adds to that list. It pushes every single unit that has a zeroing in on it goes up in the list because it needs to move. It needs to do something before you hit it. That pressure is actually worth all the weaknesses of the light mortars together. You're overloading your enemy. You're making sure that he is mentally stressed out and overloaded. And that is what wins you games. Yeah, you do get the lucky hits as well. There will crop up sixes, especially if you take many light mortars. In my World Open War list, I had 8 light mortars. That was a lot. Maybe too much. I invested a lot of points. In the lists I'm building right now, I'm not taking a full UFO list, but I am still utilizing light mortars. So the lucky hits will crop up, and you capitalize on those, right? Sometimes a Wolverine dies. Not every time, not every game, but sometimes. And light mortars are actually very, very good anti-battery units, because most gunline armies will have fixed artillery pieces. And those fixed pieces are just sitting there, and they can't really move. So you zeroing in on that piece will kill it eventually. Or it will pin it out so it doesn't work anymore, right? And for the price of 2 light mortars, any artillery piece of the game costs approximately the same as 2 light mortars, right? The only thing you can get cheaper, I think, is light autocannons, which are priced very low and very competitive. But everything else, I mean, you can just get a couple of light mortars and use those 2 light mortars to zero in on his heavy howitzer. Give it a couple of turns, and that heavy howitzer is hit. Even if it's shooting back at you, it's crap. Frankly, it's crap at counter battery fire because it's not that much better than you are, right? And if it shoots first at you, you go down. You're not being hit. You're not losing your models. And even if you do lose your models, you have the second one to pick up the pace and zero in on that heavy howitzer. So anti-battery fire is really great, and I often use it as combined arms. I'll get back to that one, but I use it in combination with other assets, which really works well. And you can see me doing that in my game against Jonathan Martin. Go watch that game. So what is combined arms? Well, combined arms is a group of different assets taken mostly from the heavy weapons platoon. Although you can build this with a normal rifle platoon, just without the MMG team, then you use an LMG armed backline holding infantry unit instead. So the group consists of for me, of an inexperienced MMG team, an inexperienced light mortar, and a regular anti-tank rifle. All of these are less than 40 points a pop. So we are less than 120 points here, maybe 100 points in this combat group. This combat group is worth a lot more than 100 points of infantry because you have 3 units and they each do different things, although they can all of them influence an infantry unit. So imagine you're moving against my group with your unit of infantry. You've got an LMG, so you're moving first, you're moving up, you're shooting at one of these units. Which one do you pick? I think you pick the MMG team. The MMG team responds by going down. Now, I have 2 units that can shoot back at you. I've got an AT rifle that can kill one guy, at least give you a pin, and I got a light mortar that shoots at you, right? So the response here is anything that's threatened in this one group goes down, which is also why, if I need to activate 2 of these group units first, then I go on ambush because I'll just sit there waiting to go down. The first thing you shoot at will go down. The 2 other things will shoot back at you. And then next turn, you'll have a pin, have lost 1 guy, and I'm zeroing in on a 5 now, right? So if I get the first dice next turn, which is pretty likely, I'll start out using my MMG team, shooting at you, encouraging you to go down, because otherwise you'll get maybe 2 hits, right? 2 hits, lose 1 guy. That's the second pin. He might go down. That infantry might go down. And then the light mortar shoots again. And the anti-tank rifle shoots again. So I'm sort of piling on at this. One of the things that you might find you need, right, with a group like this is an inexperienced platoon commander somewhere nearby. Because if they start losing dudes, they are pretty vulnerable to breaking in morale, right? So that +2 of an inexperienced platoon commander sitting close enough to give morale bonuses, that could be rather good. This really works if you can isolate an area of combat. And as I said before, go back, watch my game against Jonathan Martin. I had one flank where I sort of isolated a couple of his units against a group of mine. And I dominated his units. In the end, he actually moved away from that area, and I brought in my outflankers and stuff. But he simply gave up on that area because he couldn't really move up. So an isolated area of combat, flanks are good for that. And then typically for me, the anti-tank rifle and the MMG goes first. Most of the time they go on ambush, and then the light mortars follow up. Sometimes I'll even deploy the light mortar out of line of sight of whatever I'm working against, the infantry I'm working against, and they'll move out turn 1, end of turn 1, and take the shot then. Next thing I want to talk to you about is a concept called pie slicing. Pie slicing for me is something I picked up when I was playing Infinity the game. It's very important in Infinity the game. It's where you look down your model's eye view, what can I actually see and how close can I get to my enemy? Can I see that model over there slicing the pie so very thinly? And if I can't see the model, I'm moving just 1 millimeter that way, so now I can see it. That was the concept. I use this concept with most of my units now, especially with light mortars, because you just need to be able to see your enemy, right? You need to be able to see one guy or something and stay in cover yourselves. So often my light mortars are working more or less alone. If I don't have them in a group, like that combined arms group, I'll be working alone. I'll be working behind a line of sight blocker. And I'll try to take edging shots where I can isolate one of my enemy's units, shoot at that, and then not have return fire at me because I'm shooting at that one unit, right? I'll try to go late in the turn, and I'll try to go when an area is secured so I don't get counter fire at my light mortar. So when everything has gone on his flank, I'll move my light mortar up so that it can see that one unit behind. So I'm still behind my forest, right? Or a ruin. And then I can see that one unit. I'll shoot at that one unit because I'm sure that he can't push anything up and take the shots back. This can also be done with smoke. And it's one of the ways that you can win against a gunline army is if he's clearly overwhelming you with guns and you don't think you have enough cover to actually use your light mortars to zero in on every single piece that he has and win that fight, place them behind line of sight blockers, pie slice as close as you can, and then start plonking down smoke. Because once that smoke gets there, you've created your own line of sight blocking cover. And you can start moving up behind the smoke. Yeah, you might lose it sometimes, but as soon as you zero it in, that light mortar can continuously create smoke every single turn, and should. You should fire every single turn because you need to keep firing so that you're zeroed in once you get the smoke. And then, if the smoke drifts one way or the other, that's good for you because that's extra cover against all of his howitzers. Because you're still hitting that spot where you zeroed in, but the cover, the smoke that you already have placed there, it now drifted like 4 inches that way. So now you've got 2 pieces of terrain. Brilliant. We love that. What about hedging? Hedging is where most of the times I have my light mortars. So I have them in combined arms groups, I have them pie slicing behind line of sight blockers, or I have them behind a hedge or a wall. So linear obstacles is really, really good for light mortars. Why? Especially walls, by the way. Why? Because if you are behind a linear obstacle, you're always getting that cover save, and that is what keeps you alive. Go back, and the light mortars are vulnerable, right? They've got weaknesses. Keeping them alive, you do that by going late in the turn, but if you get shot at early in the turn, you go down. You take the best possible cover save you can, and that's why I say walls are best, because you're taking a 2+ cover save, whereas the enemy, when you're shooting out from behind that wall, he doesn't get a cover save. You're indirect. So that's how you keep your mortars alive, and you keep them alive, and you keep the enemy wasting shots. Right? He's spending his 100 points trying to kill that light mortar. 100 points of infantry, right? With an LMG, he's trying to kill that light mortar. You're going down 2+ cover saves. So he's wasted that unit, and then possibly you have extra assets that you can move up and try and kill the unit that you just pushed up and put in danger of just to try and kill your light mortar, right? This makes the enemy waste units, waste time, puts out a lot of pressure, but I would say that the most important thing here is, with light mortars, do not take chances. Go late in the turn, only shoot when you have to, only shoot when you're secure. Don't take chances. The light mortars will melt away as soon as you take a chance. That was it from me. My call out, my thanks for this one goes out to World Open War, where I tested out my UFO list for the first time, to all my opponents there. Thank you so much. Manuel, you taught me what I know about losing with the light mortars. So yeah, that was it for me today. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.